Before we start, a quick show of hands. Who feels familiar and comfortable with blockchain? We normally get quite a mix. Okay, so panelists, we've got some experts in the room. For those who aren't experts, it's a really easy way to think about blockchain as a kind of database, a database where everyone gets a copy, a database where everyone can check to see if it's been tampered with, and a database where consensus is needed in order to add new information. And that turns out to have some pretty good applications in business. So to talk about that with me this morning, we've got a panel. Tim Lee, CEO of Fractonium, which is a digital funding platform. Lambros, covering my mic, sorry guys. Lambros, who's CEO of Station 5, which is a digital product consultancy. Melissa Ran, who's head of global partnerships at BitForward, which is a blockchain venture and advocacy company. And Yuka Tomita, who's a director at Ledger, which is a security and blockchain infrastructure company. Welcome, guys. Thank you. So we've seen fortunes made in cryptocurrencies and some fortunes lost, probably. And now we're seeing more adoption and interest from the top end of town and from all kinds of different companies. This technology, what it really brings us is a way for people who don't know each other to trust a shared record of events. And that has a lot of applications. That's very, very useful. So a great, an Australian example, where Australia is leading the world, is the ASX's replacement of their CHESS clearing and settlement system. That technology they're using is a big commercial project. It will impact an entire industry. There will be some incredible efficiencies gained once people get over that implementation hump. And the software platform itself that they're using is being open sourced, and we're already seeing adoption from other exchanges around the region. So that's going to kind of lead to this super regional platform. And in the long term, 5 to 7 years, there'll be a lot of new opportunities in the broking and securities business because of that. So that's very interesting. But there are a lot of other corporate cases, and that's what we wanted to talk about today, to Andrew's point. Aside from the cryptocurrencies, where are normal companies, both small and medium enterprises all the way up to the large corporates, finding returns on investment in this technology? Nobody got this excited about databases. Why are they getting so excited about blockchain? And also, what are the challenges in actually realizing an ROI? So with that, I'll turn to the panel and sorry, get my voice back. Lambros, to start with you, what sort of companies can benefit from blockchain technology?
I wouldn't limit it to an industry. I think one that I've seen quite a tremendous amount of is kind of freight and logistics. One of the well-known stories is out of Hamburg Sud, who everyone would be kind of quite familiar with. And they identified that they were kind of losing in the vicinity of $18 billion per year in pharmaceuticals alone, just due to lack of kind of traceability and transparency. For them, they kind of approach it from the perspective of, basic cost-benefit analysis. Can we resolve this issue, even if partially? And in light of that, they started trialing with blockchain, and where they ended up was with a solution that solved for that problem and is currently being used, in a live production environment within an organisation, which is super impressive, given it is still classified quite an emerging technology. I think any industry can really benefit from it if there is a use case for improving transparency. If there is kind of doubt around what's happening in the background. That's why I think a lot of, say, banks, for instance, naturally are trying to see how they can incorporate blockchain technology to improve transparency, to streamline processes.
Okay, so when is blockchain actually a good solution? So supply chain's a great example. Tim, when should a company be looking at blockchain? When shouldn't
I
they?
think it's really if you look at where there are pain points that are in existence, because new technology, this is an experimental technology still, and it's about where's the biggest pain point to actually adopt it. And I think just one example that I just sort of thought of, just to put it into a perspective that people can maybe understand. I mean, you can probably tell by my accent I'm originally a POM, can't do anything about it, sorry about that. But I've got money in the bank in the UK, in Brighton on the south coast. Anybody been to Brighton on the south coast? Quite a lot of people. It's a dump, isn't it? No, it's not. No, it's not. It's lovely. Right now, it is quicker for me to fly to Heathrow, drive down to Brighton, go to my bank, pick up the cash, get a Kiss Me Quick hat on the Brighton Pavilion, fly back from Heathrow to Sydney than it is to go via the banking system. Okay? Cryptocurrencies, the original creation of blockchain, enabled that to happen in minutes. That's how powerful this technology has the capability to be within financial services. There are much wider applications than that. But just, if you think of any adoption of technology, anything that is 10 times faster, cheaper, better is going to be adopted quicker. And just that use case, I think, for me, just summarizes at a very strong level how powerful the potential of this technology is. So I just thought I'd just bring that into the frame.
Tim, with the other side of that, speed and efficiency is, I know you're paying very low fees with your cryptocurrency transfer as well, but equally you lose out on a lot of the control and reconciliation regulation in that space. So
who cares? If I can get my money from the UK to here in 3 minutes rather than waiting 3 days, 2 to 3 days, which happens, right? Now, I appreciate there are challenges in converting from cryptocurrencies or blockchain-related structures, but or cryptocurrencies as was, there are changes. But the banking sector is adopting the tech to enable this to happen. So Swift, for example, are creating that layer that will enable immediate transactions. That's going to be a few years off, but things like Ripple that are coordinating about 45 banks are enabling these transactions. And some banks have trialed it to get near instantaneous transactions. So rather than going via the traditional banking system, where it used to be that if it was getting money from the UK to here, it would go London, Frankfurt, Hong Kong, here. And you just cut out all that infrastructure. That's how powerful this is. And it can apply across many industries, but I'm sure there are other people that...
Well, that was a nice segue, thank you.
Yeah.
There's my next question, doing my job for me. There are other applications in other industries, some more advanced than others. Mel, have you got a use case you can share around some of the corporate uptake you've seen?
So I was going to say, yeah, so beyond the cryptocurrency, and I think off Lambros' point about provenance, I think that definitely logistics in provenance, there's like a great use case there. I think recent news, Nestle and Carrefour in France, they've decided to add one of their products, which is the French potato, like instant potato mash mix, onto the IBM's Food Network blockchain, so to help them track the provenance. But because apparently French people really care about, the mashed potatoes, instant mix they buy is actually from France and good quality. So I was very surprised because I thought if you care about quality, why are you buying instant potato mix? But so it's yes. So I really want to point out. So there's the market demand and the market need. There are some products where people care about provenance more than others, and also, some people might say, well, you can track them not using blockchain, or even with blockchain, you still need the accuracy of the inputted information. But because this technology is known for this particular kind of space, and so people associate it with the benefits of provenance and feeling more secure. So then you will get consumers feeling like, oh wow, this cool new thing, now I can really track where it came from. So that could result in greater sales or greater brand recognition. So that's a way that the company can get value out of it. The other thing to think about is blockchain technology works better when you have a situation where many different parties are transacting with each other and you need to record information, but the different parties are external to each other. And for some reason, you want to either eliminate the intermediary, or you don't want to trust the intermediary, or you have intermediary but you feel like they have too much power, or whatever reason. If you have that kind of need, then you could use blockchain. But if you don't, if you want to be the centralized person, if you want to control all that, then it's not a good solution. Yeah. So it really depends on what exact situation it is. Yeah.
That's a very interesting way of putting Tim's banking example into light. There's there's likely going to be some tension there between people who want to control and people who want to
yes.
devolve that
So,
control.
so a lot of time it becomes a philosophical discussion. But if you're from a business point of view and you're thinking of, making money and profits and sustainability, like these are all considerations to balance out. Yeah.
And Yuka, in Ledger, with the infrastructure you're providing, you work with all kinds of companies around the world. What sort of industries are you seeing benefits and uptake in?
Ledger is definitely very well known for the cryptocurrency space, but we also provide infrastructure, security for infrastructure solutions for blockchain applications. So as a good example, we're working with a company that's looking at smart meters. So smart meters for water toxicity levels. So when you're drinking consumable water, they have to put meters to make sure the water you're drinking is not toxic. But those meters are actually quite hackable, or that information can be incorrect oftentimes. So now they're using the blockchain to secure that information. So taking the information from the meter, securing the blockchain so that you know for a fact that the water that you are consuming is indeed drinkable, consumable. That's kind of a high stakes health benefit that you get from that. But we can also work with, as an example, energy companies to do the same thing. So take information from a solar panel, their meter readings off of a solar panel, take that, secure it, and then broadcast the blockchain. Then you have one source of truth, one secure piece of information that says, this is how much energy was produced by this one solar panel. And from there, you can create a sharing economy for energy, or you can even create, financial derivatives on top of it, or whatever it is,
And what sort of return on investment would that company be aiming for out of that kind of project?
I mean, it's difficult to say in terms of return on investment. I mean, what's the tangible benefit of quality data? Knowing that you have quality data is very important. But a good example of a tangible fiscal benefit that you can get from securing smart meter information is in Puerto Rico. They lose about $400 million a year because people are tampering or hacking into the smart metering systems and changing the amount, the meter changes month to month, so that people don't have to pay as much money every month. So if you can actually secure that information, people can't tamper with it, then you gain that $400 million back.
And Lambros, I think you had some
I was just going to say,
well.
yeah, there are obviously great use cases in kind of supply chain management and that sort of thing that we've spoken to. I think the general kind of lens to have with this is that if there's a use case where you need kind of improved traceability, transparency, and efficiency gains, that's generally a good starting point, I think. Ultimately, with technology, it all comes down to, is there a problem we need to solve for, and is blockchain the way that we solve for that problem? One of the really interesting projects that was kind of started getting rumored towards the end of the first quarter of the calendar year was Facebook's work, kind of following everything that happened, around, I guess, the election, the Trump election, and with that whole kind of process that occurred, I think what they've kind of been rumored to be working on is a standardization of data on the blockchain. So moving, we all have like login with Facebook, login with Google. It's theorized that they're working on a project to make it so that the login with Facebook is actually no longer hitting their servers, and so that they're actually putting onto the blockchain some degree of information so that they start to separate that trust away from themselves a little more. So they'll obviously create the technology and maintain the technology, but ultimately that data won't sit with them. And so they had a real need that they needed to solve for, which is a lack of I guess, trust in the brand. And this was a way of solving it, potentially with no quantifiable ROI, but definitely a need.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And as you say, moving on from the cryptocurrencies, one of the other big emerging uses now and almost being hyped as the next stage of cryptocurrency is the fractionalization of assets. And we're lucky enough to have Tim, who's CEO of a company called Fractonium. With that fractionalization of assets, is that going to remain in the cryptocurrency space, or is that something that will come in, impact other businesses or even the top end of town?
That's a really good question. I mean, the fractionalization of ownership, I mean, we've seen that. I mean, are there many people here, I guess bearing in mind with Lend Lease, how many people here in property in general? Okay, a few people. Okay, so REITs, the real estate investment trusts are a familiar type of model. But the fractionalization of ownership can actually extend to anything, to a painting. It could be to a piece of equipment. It could be to a hospital. It could be to anything. And the next stage of development is where you have a regulatory structure around fractional ownership that actually enables the ownership to be tokenized and those tokens to be tradable globally. Now that's all subject to regulation. I'll just give you an example which will sort of put a bit of meat on the bone, if you like. The first cab off the rank for us has been very much the art and museum space, because we looked at where's the biggest problem, because adopting technology is all about painkillers rather than vitamins. You've got to solve a problem. And museums and art galleries are constantly struggling for funding. For example, Donald Trump's administration right now is trying to cut $500 million off the art budget in the States. And then when you look at the GFC, when that happened, 40% of corporate sponsorship fell off a cliff overnight. And if we're to believe the general zeitgeist, which I think a lot of us are viewing, and it can become a bit of self-reinforcing image in some ways, but if we're looking at 2020 being a recession globally, which is where a lot of the zeitgeist is heading, then a lot of these funding issues for the arts and museum space is going to get even worse. So what we're looking at is the idea of how can we embrace the supporters of the museum to actually support the museum by taking fractional pieces of art. So the idea would be, if, for example, the museum was going to buy a Damien Hirst painting for $5 million, let's keep it really simple. If they got pre-commitment from their supporters to actually fund 75% of that particular piece of art, instead of spending $5 million, they'll be spending $1.25 million. So they can actually get 4 times the amount of art for the same budget. Now, the pieces of art would be housed in the museum itself, so they would have a better quality exhibition, so there's enhanced brand value. From the supporters' point of view, the corporate sponsors now have an investment thesis as well as a brand value thesis. So the idea is it also enables the museums to engage their audiences. So that sort of structure, you can think of that for almost anything. Anything that, any industries that you guys are working in, tokenization is going to be the next major cab off the rank. And once the regulation comes into play, which is a gray area globally at the moment, this whole space is just going to transform the capital markets irrevocably. And if you think of it in property, there are already a number of fractionalized property plays that are getting out there where people are and will be able to actually buy $250 worth of a property, ultimately. And you'll be able to buy a piece of property in Korea or in France, so you can hedge your risk. There's going to be all sorts of things that are going on. So fractional ownership is going to be a major, major part of this narrative.
It's kind of the ultimate in unbundling.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's going to open up all sorts of opportunities.
So I actually have a question for Tim about this. Yeah. So I find this concept very, very exciting. It's one of the reasons why I decided to join this industry. But it's like the blockchain technology and the tokens, it enables that transaction to be recorded and to happen. But what about the collaboration with the legal institutions?
Well, I mean,
to actually legitimize, I bought this token, that means I actually own a part of this painting, should any disputes happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right, because I've just come back from 2 conferences, one in New York and one in Malta. And Malta, just to give a bit of extra meat on the bone again, Malta is right at the driving edge of regulation in this whole space. They defined in October last year what a virtual financial asset was in law. And so they're driving the regulation from the bottom up, if you like. Because if you look at the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the FCA, the Financial Control Authority in the UK, they're very much dealing with regulations that have been around since the 1930s and 1940s. And so this is just dramatic change that's coming through from the technology side that the regulators aren't quite ready for. But the early adopters are. And so Malta is, because I spoke with the regulators out there, Malta are driving models with Liechtenstein, with Dubai, with Belarus has just come into the picture, with Gibraltar, with Saudi Arabia, even with Singapore. And so there's a recognition that the regulators and the legal framework needs to be adjusted, because right now, if you look at fractionalizing a piece of art, the way that it's been done in terms of one piece of art, there was an Andy Warhol that was sold for, it was about $12 million late last year, and they set up a special purpose vehicle, a separate limited company, and they sold shares. Now that's just such an antiquated way of doing it, and don't get me wrong, it's the right way to do it in the current legal framework, but once the regulators get behind all this, tokenization and the definition of what a digital asset, what a virtual financial asset, whatever you want to call it, is going to be transformatory.
So if I can add a question, a lot of the regulations that apply today in this space are securities regulations.
Yes.
And I would say that you're right that those regulations have been in place since the 30s, but for every regulation there is an original case. There was some abuse by somebody, some con that resulted in that regulation. So they are there for a reason. You know, and they're there to protect consumers and investors.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. But can I ask a question of everybody here? How many people have been to a casino in the past 6 months? Okay, and how many have been to a race course in the past 6 months? Okay, in all those circumstances, when you go there, you can spend as much as you like and nobody cares. You've got personal responsibility, okay? So my view would be, you know, sure, you have to protect the little guys, and I understand that, right? But you've also got to enable personal responsibility, because these laws that you're talking about from the 1930s and 40s, we've moved on technologically a little bit since the 1930s. You know, I think we've got the engine now, I think, or something. But you know, yeah. But I mean, yeah, I'm not trying to make light of the subject, because it is an important subject. But it's the idea that if one can structure things to say, okay, you've got a limit of up to 10 grand or something, like you can with equity crowdfunding, then that means that people can actually buy into these fractional type of ideas. So, I mean, it's about, you've got to limit the risk, and it's about evolution, not revolution, and I take that on board completely. But there's also a sense of, hey, come on, yeah, we're adults here. You know, we're over 18, we can take some personal responsibility.
Tim, I'm going to challenge you.
Good, fantastic.
But that's fine. Because when companies like Hamburg, Sud, and Maersk adopted blockchain, these processes are already happening on mass scale. And as you said correctly, these process, like, you can already set up an organization, a proprietary limited company, get that to own the artwork, and then have multiple shareholders. Yes. But that's not being done on a mass scale. What other companies like Maersk are doing, like what Hamburg Sud are doing, like what Facebook are doing, these processes are already happening mass scale. People want to do them. Do you really think that making it easier is going to incentivize people to do it, given that there are other blockchain applications where people are doing it on a mass scale already? Like, what I'm saying is that this isn't a mass scale process. Why would blockchain make people want to do it more? In the case of art, say.
I don't know. Well, I think if you, I mean, there's another area that I'm quite passionate about, which I know John is as well, in relation to sustainability, right? Now, there are funding models that simply cannot be funded in the current infrastructure, right? And there's, for example, there's a not-for-profit based out of Europe that has bought $30 million worth of land in the Amazon to stop logging going on. All right. Now that's a very powerful emotive message, right? Now the way these guys are looking at things is they're looking at the GPS, Google's GPS structures to identify square meterages of land, and then looking at the idea of there are revenues, carbon credit revenue, offset revenues that can come in from those square bits of land. So then you've got people that can actually get behind sustainability. Now, not-for-profits, land banking and those types of things are a nightmare to get funded. This structure opens up completely new funding models, and sustainability is a problem that we're all going to be facing, and these models can be replicated. So they've already bought that land. If they can then refinance that via fractional ownership, they can buy more, and then they can buy more, and whatever it might be, and that achieves a narrative that is very, very powerful and very strong, especially for millennials. Now, I'm a post-millennial, I'm a dinosaur, but you guys, I mean, sustainability, it's your Earth. It's your Earth.
So just put it back on him. Well, on the point of investor protection, I understand we're opening new channels. I wouldn't funding models, perhaps securitization has been around for a while, but certainly new funding channels. Yes. There remains the point of investor protections and custody of tokens as opposed to custody of physical assets. Yuka, you work for Ledger as security and infrastructure company. You guys have got some use cases in this space. You're actually addressing some of these custodianship problems.
Yeah, I mean, I guess once you tokenize something, there actually is a whole new host of issues. How do you secure that token? How do you protect that token? And also, how do you protect the misuse of that token. So as much as you want to say, okay, blockchain is a secure application, and once it's on the ledger, nothing can happen to it, and it's immutable. But what happens before it gets onto the blockchain? What happens before it's a security token? All that human process is still behind it, and that's actually a process you still have to think about. And it's not like a end-all, be-all solution to everything. You do have to think about the process behind it, and figure out either how to remove the human factor from it, or how to ensure that that process is digitally insured as well. So I think that's kind of...
Can I just respond to that in a general thing? You're absolutely right. I mean, cryptocurrencies, have been lots of hacks and that type of thing, and you guys are doing a great job in that space with the nano ledger and that type of stuff. But with security tokens, for example, the identity of everybody is actually baked into the token itself. So if the token is actually hacked, the person that issued it can then burn it and then reissue it. So the idea is that because all the exchanges that are going to be built are going to be regulated, you need to have AML KYC in the exchanges to sell that token. It needs to be identified as you. Now, they could fraudulently get my identity or whatever it might be. But that's going to help. But you're right, the custodian structure that you guys do is fantastic. But the regulation is sort of being baked into the technology increasingly as time is going on.
And that's actually exactly the point. It depends on where that type of information. So the KYC AML has become a really big topic in cryptocurrencies because of that exact issue. Where are you putting customer information? How are you identifying customer information? And how are you protecting that? Is that on the blockchain? Is that off the chain? Where is it being stored? So that data protection in itself is a whole other question that people have to deal with now in this realm.
And as part of that broader regulatory picture, as you mentioned, Malta, Dubai, Liechtenstein, these regulators are moving quickly. Other regulators, maybe not so much. There's certainly a case there for regulatory arbitrage. But to what extent is that really going to make a difference in the short term?
I think in the short term...
There's a cost to play that arbitrage game.
There is a cost, but I mean, I think it's about... in the early stages, because the early adopting regulators are the ones that are going to really help drive this space, models will be seen and tested and trialed in these new spaces. I mean, I think, and maybe this is a bit of a controversial opinion, I think Australia is so perfectly positioned to be a fast follower. But unfortunately, for my money, and this might be a bit controversial, I think they're too busy looking at what the SEC and the FCA are doing, which is the Financial Control Authority in the UK and the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US, to actually sort of say, hang on a second, we could be real leaders in this space. I mean, we've got 23 million people. We're not a big country. And I think, if there was, and I don't want to get political on this at all, because that's not what this is about, but if there was a will to drive innovation, to drive into the space, we could be thought leaders completely in this space. Not right at the top end, you're right at the bleeding edge, but as a fast follower.
So there are certainly cases where innovators, I mean, from an international investor's perspective, Australia has a great reputation for innovation. But we are seeing innovators leaving Australia.
There's a big brain drain going on, and a lot of people are headquartering offshore, which it's not a travesty, but that's just the reality of the way the market works. I mean, it's great. I mean, I was at an event last night, and there was a guy from Accello who's now based in the States who's raised $100 million. He's an Aussie, but he's still got his development team in Wollongong. All right, and that's primarily driven because people like to work and live in Wollongong rather than living and working in San Francisco, where the average developer stays in a job for 21 months. And the rates of the cost of developers over there is insane. But he's raised money in the States, and that's the reality if we don't do something.
That's the reality for the blockchain innovators and software companies. Mel, is this limited to blockchain and blockchain innovators?
Yeah. No. So I mean, what you guys are suggesting is the idea of headquartering, your company somewhere else for tax reasons. Like the biggest thing is because we have, much higher taxes than a lot of other countries, Singapore, and so yeah. Like I guess for any company in any industry, there are issues that they need to arbitrage and think about. And so Australia is actually, like some of the policies that we have, we get benefits from it, but the flip side is definitely the brain drain situation. The other one I can think of is employment. Most global companies need to hire global talent, but because of immigration policies and those kind of things, it's very difficult to get people here. And so then people have to be creative. So this is not an issue that's, I think, just faced by our industry, but I think it is more intensified in our industry because many elements of what we're doing in the financial innovation space, it's heavily regulated. There's a lot of fear. There might be some controversy and negativity as well. So it does mean that we have to be more considerate of where it is that we're setting up the structures to make for it to make sense. Yeah.
And Ross, you look like you had an argument
It's
to
like,
make there.
do we go down the philosophy path? And as the token Greek on the stage, I have to. I think like realistically, I think Australia is probably not the best place for innovation. I wouldn't say that's limited to blockchain. I think we're great followers in terms of like once someone's already paved the way. I've seen like, has anyone here?
But maybe that's a smart strategy,
It may be.
I'm just Australia.
Show of hands, who's kind of been to San Francisco for the purpose of work? Like a few in the room. It's like, I don't know what the general consensus is, and we probably don't have time to do Q&A with everyone in the room, but kind of having gone over there and explored the market over there, it's a very different landscape to here, and you've got Australian founders over there and organisations that are about fostering Australian founders, where new ideas are really kind of brought in. But the difference with the market over there and the market here, I wouldn't say is limited just to the regulators or to the policymakers. I think, I'm very fond of the view that it's also driven by organisations as well. I think corporates are very reluctant to take on new technologies here. You've got organisations overseas like JP Morgan who are very readily investing in new technology and backing startups. I don't know of any of kind of the big four banks here who have backed a blockchain startup or a crypto startup, and I'm sure it'd be on the front page of the AFR tomorrow if it happened because it'd just be absolutely ridiculous, or it'd seem that way. But in the US, this is not ridiculous at all. This is something that is done on a regular basis. People always think of, for example, outside of the blockchain space, we always look at organizations like Salesforce and HubSpot being direct competitors with each other. But Salesforce funded HubSpot Series D, right? It's like these are the sorts of things that happen over there. I feel like there's this much more openness to investing in technology and helping each other prosper from the private sector as well, not just from the public sector. And I think that's where, in my opinion, that's where the biggest mistake is, not necessarily in the policymakers. Because if you had the large organizations trying to drive this change and working with the startups and investing in them and helping them through and really heroing their kind of journey, I think there'd be a lot more happening. Because I think it starts at the bottom and works its way up, yes, but I think that to get to the top, which is with new regulation, I think it actually needs to be brought on by the private sector as well.
And that requires something as simple as a business case. How is this going to help our bottom line? How is this going to help us with a Royal Commission? There are no answers right now, but those are big questions. The other thing we talked about when we were preparing our panel was the role of government beyond regulation. And to the point of cryptocurrency, you mentioned earlier our discussion on the ease of payment, international payments. Now, of course, over the last 5 to 10 years, central banks around the world have been trying to get rid of large denomination banknotes because large denomination banknotes are kind of, used in trafficking, used in criminal activities, money laundering, drugs, and running black markets, which all of which these banks want to help get rid of. Now, as soon as they got rid of that, about the same timing, in steps Bitcoin. Again, it's untraceable. It allows fast transfer of value. So from a central bank perspective, you see reactions of people going, oh, blockchain, crypto, money laundering, which isn't necessarily fair. And we've seen a good separation of the technology from its first use case. But one of the things I learned recently was that there are governments getting in on the crypto scene, not just to control it, but to actually participate and create their own coins. Do you want to speak to that, Tim? Or Mel?
Yeah, I mean, a few countries are looking definitively at crypto-based coins as sovereign currencies or digital currencies. And I think if you look, there's the Chinese are looking, there's the ruble, there's Singapore looking at, very soon in the Barbados Islands, they're actually launching or due to be launching a sovereign coin. And it becomes very powerful because the central bank then actually has control over so many different things. I mean, I emceed a panel back in late last year down in Canberra, and some of the people there have been talking to governments and that type of thing. And one of the things that came out was the UK government were exploring a sovereign coin with the idea that they could pay NHS workers, the health workers, directly without going via a bank and saving themselves a bucket load of cash. But then, of course, the narrative came back. Hang on a second, this is going to, disruption is one thing, but taking out a whole swathe of the bank's income and directly conflicting with those was going to create a challenge. But I think, if you also consider that if you've got digital cash, rather than sort of traditional cash, you can't see where that money's being spent. With digital cash, you could actually track where funds are being spent. So you could fine-tune the economy in real time if you had access to the information, not the personal information, but where money was actually going. And in doing that, instead of waiting for the lag indicators lots of governments have to look at, they could actually fine-tune the economy in real time. So I think there's going to be a narrative coming through where this will happen, but the technology's got to be a heck of a lot better. And absolutely, you're right in terms of the large denomination notes. I mean, Bitcoin is what is known as pseudo-anonymous. You can, you can't actually see who's sent the transaction, but you can see the transaction. But, and any anonymous or pseudo-anonymous type structure, in my view, will be kiboshed by governments when they come in. And I think, in my view, and I've said this a few times, I think Bitcoin will be dead in 10 years, personally. And it's a very controversial view, I know.
I'll start shorting.
That's only my opinion.
I'm conscious of time, so to wrap up, I thought, with all of these perspectives, we've got the suitability of blockchain to different kinds of companies or different kinds of use case, networks of companies. We've got the security and custody, regulatory aspects and protecting investors versus the efficiencies that it'll bring. Summarizing statement, I guess, for each of you, what can companies in the room do to look for an ROI, find some kind of leverage, or even shortcut some of these challenges and get to a real business case quickly?
Well, I would actually say you wouldn't want to say, what can I do with blockchain? You would want to look at what kind of business problems you have, determine, what's the cost of the problem, what issue are you trying to solve, and then maybe blockchain is the answer. And if it is, then you can deep dive into, which network you want to use, what DLT is actually most appropriate, what characteristics you need to solve. But I would say never go into a problem and saying, I want to use this one it's just a technology. I want to use this one technology solution somewhere in my business, because that just ends up being another 5-year digitization project that doesn't go anywhere.
Great summary. Don't have much to add to that. It's awesome. But I guess just from my own experience, we do a lot of hackathons and workshops around this space, and so there are other benefits besides just the use case. Any engagement with innovation, it's an opportunity to engage with a broader community to kind of inspire your existing staff. So I guess if there is interest, or if it's an area that your company is hasn't looked at all and isn't familiar with, it doesn't hurt to do some sort of events or workshops around the area just to get people thinking about the possibilities. Yeah. Conscious of realistically in Australia, most companies would probably not have done anything. So we're in the very, very early stage of engaging with this whole industry. Yeah.
Well, the ladies to my left summarised it perfectly, so I'm going to pass it on. That was great.
I would say the key thing for anybody here is just to understand what this technology is all about, what it can do that you need it to do. And I think it's linked into AI, it's linked into all the other technologies as well. But it does have an awful lot of flexibility and power once you understand what's going on. And it's almost as if you go down the rabbit hole, in inverted commas, and you find this world of wonderland that's actually there. And you find the Cheshire Cat, and you find the you know, the Jack of Knaves and all these really weird, and the Mad Hatter's Tea Party and all that sort of stuff. But there is a landscape that is just full of opportunity. And by coincidence, I wrote a book called Down the Rabbit Hole, but I won't go in there, which is the blockchain in plain English. But I would say, seriously, look at the YouTube channels. Definitely engage with the BitForward community. They're doing a lot of hackathons, and just get to understand what this can do. You know, I mean, people in the space are really open to working with you guys and helping you understand it. And I think there's only upside, but if you do nothing, there's downside.
Thank you very much. Thank you.